can you have some, sugar sweetened things? Yeah, in moderation. And moderation is different for everybody. But should we be getting, lean meats? Should we be getting fruits and vegetables? Should we be getting whole grains? Yeah, I mean, we should probably be getting a good variety of all of these things. And when you get to a type of diet that says you can't eat this type of food, and particularly when a food is a whole minimally processed food and they're fear-mongering a whole minimally processed food, that should throw up some red flags.
What's up, my friend, and welcome to the Legendary Life Podcast. I'm your host, Ted Rice, health expert and coach to executives, entrepreneurs, and other high-performing professionals. Today, we have another interview for you. My guest's name is Dr. Alan Bacon. He's an accomplished expert in fitness and nutrition. He's got all the certifications. He's a certified personal trainer, a certified physique and bodybuilding coach, a certified nutritionist, and even a coach for USA Powerlifting. But the reason I have Dr. Alan on the show today is because I follow him on Instagram. And even though I create content and I'm an expert, it's always nice to talk to a fellow expert who is creating content in a way that I enjoy and that I feel, oh, wow, this is helping me become a better coach and also stay on top of things sometimes that I forget. So we're going to dive into the topic of busting through plateaus. If you're in a situation where you feel like you're doing everything right, but you've hit a plateau with your fat loss and you're not sure why, and you hear so many conflicting explanations, you're in the right place. If you want to get leaner, stronger, and upgrade your health this year, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my Unstoppable After 40 newsletter. Every Friday, I send out my newsletter to help you transform your body and reclaim your health in record time. It's weekly wisdom you can read in just under 5 minutes. So go to legendarylifepodcast.com/newsletter and subscribe now. And if you're already a subscriber, I want you to pay attention for emails that are coming. We've totally revamped the newsletter and I know you're going to love it. That's all I've got. Again, go to legendarylifepodcast.com/newsletter and subscribe now. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Alan Bacon to the show. Alan Bacon, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me on, Ted. Happy to be here.
Yeah, man. As I was telling you earlier, I found you on Instagram somehow, and I really enjoyed the message you were putting out because it's similar, like we talked about, we have similar messages, but we say it in a different way. And I love the topic that we're going to get into today, which is busting through plateaus. But before we get into that, we were having this conversation about the message you put out, the message I put out, and it's good that more people do it. And why do you think that is?
So I think that social media has brought us a lot of pluses and minuses. And, I think that a lot of the things that gain traction are some of the more nonsensical or inflammatory type of takes, right? Because you're going to get people that agree with those takes and you're going to get people that disagree with those takes. And both of those crowds are going to be sharing that. Now, the really funny thing about health and fitness is a lot of times the boring or the mundane is the right path. This is the way. It's almost like it's simpler than people want it to be. And I think that the proper message that people can take home from things gets diluted in social media a lot of the time because the real answers are often boring. And I think that the people that are out there trying to do it the right way have a little bit more of a challenge of getting those messages out there, because if you're consistently pushing things that people almost in the back of their mind already know that they need to be doing, it gets kind of lost in those messages, whereas those hyperbolic or inflammatory type of messages gain attention. And so I like seeing people like you that put out similar information to myself, but maybe in a different way, because if we can get these out, reinforce each other's messages, and then maybe attack it from different angles, you can help a lot more people. But, I think that fitness and health is very interesting because in my mind, the simplest way or the most reductionist way to break it down is master the basics. If you master the basics, you tend to be very, very successful in what you're going to do. And if you look at the most successful people, the people that tend to be healthier, the people that tend to, perform the best, they focus on the consistency and mastering the basics over time without loss of enthusiasm. And I think that type of message is more difficult to get out there because people think, oh, well, what's the secret? And there is nuance. And we're going to get into a lot of that nuance today, which is why I really like this topic as well, because it's something that's extremely practical and people can take home and put to use today. But, if you ask a person in your situation, you're facing a challenge, what would a healthy person do? I think a lot of the times people know a pretty good answer and actually a pretty reliable and logical answer on how to handle things. And I think that they second guess themselves a lot because of social media. I think that that there's so much noise out there, it can become confusing, and literally cutting through that shit and getting people down to the bare bones. This is what's important, is what can serve people the best. And I think that you're pretty good at getting that kind of stuff out.
Yeah, as are you, Alan. And I want to continue with this a little bit because I think it might be helpful for people listening. What are some of the so as you said, I'll give an example like this. I was on Twitter the other day, which is where I spend most of my time, even though you and I connected through Instagram. And I saw a video that went viral, and it was what I eat in a day of being a carnivore. And to your point, the people who are carnivores retweeted it. The people who hate carnivore diet and the carnivore crowd retweeted it.
So you get the carnivore crowd retweeting it, you get the middle of the ground retweeting it, and then you get the vegans retweeting it going, look at this nonsense.
Exactly. And the guy he was new to the diet, and he was eating a raw testicle pop, like a lollipop, but had a raw testicle on it. So not only, and the guy looked kind of, he did not look healthy.
Sweaty?
No, he was just I think anybody doing that type of extreme approach, I think there's I've been in the business 24 years, Alan, and I'd love to have your thoughts on this too. But I think that it's an expression of someone's emotional health or manifestation of someone's emotional health. How extreme, either because I don't know anything about the guy, but I know two things. One, he's either doing that because he feels like he needs to be super extreme to be healthy, which is not true, or he's doing that for attention on social media, which is also not a healthy thing to do. I mean, I'll do a lot of things on social media, but eating raw testicle pops, that's an all new level of commitment to get attention.
I think that it's a little bit of both. I think that people do this for attention, and I think they do it because when they get that attention, social media can become an echo chamber, right? And it's the same reason that like a lot of these nonsense things take off, is because everybody that also has that tendency tends to get in there, and then they'll comment in the comment section and they'll reinforce that way of thinking. And then it'll make him feel good because he's getting attention. And then he'll get reinforcement for these ideas because these people are all telling him that it's right. And crowd mentality is a very powerful thing. Now, for me, I view this very similar to how you do, in that I realize that we're omnivores, and both sides of the aisle have a tendency to be ridiculous. Like if you've seen Game Changers, where, they talk about the vegan side of things, that's total nonsense. I mean, if you actually start to look into the research that they were citing for that, it was so poorly done, or just completely misinterpreted. The other side of things, carnivore, is complete nonsense at the same time. You're not going to get in the best health of your life. I mean, I think that anybody that tells you that you shouldn't be eating fruits and vegetables probably has a little bit of an issue understanding some of the nuance of biology and nutritional science. And so if you look at the research, I mean, it is far and away in support of a smart omnivore type diet. Should we be including fruits and vegetables in our daily diet? Yes. Should we be fear-mongering red meats? No, we probably shouldn't. In fact, there's a lot of healthy benefits coming from these things. And the nuance of the research is what's really important here. And I think that, again, what people find really boring is when you have kind of this moderated approach to saying, why don't we have a good variety of all these things? Stick to whole minimally processed foods for the majority of your intake. Can you have some sugar sweetened things? Yeah, in moderation. And moderation is different for everybody. But should we be getting lean meat. Should we be getting fruits and vegetables? Should we be getting whole grains? Yeah. I mean, we should probably be getting a good variety of all of these things. And when you get to a type of diet that says you can't eat this type of food, and particularly when a food is a whole minimally processed food and they're fear mongering a whole minimally processed food, that should throw up some red flags. But I think to your point, a lot of this happens because you gain notoriety online for having these stances. It supports you monetarily. And even in some of the most respected guys in the fitness and health field, I've seen some fallacies that have been pushed because it's monetarily expedient to do that.
Can you give an example? I mean, you don't have to name the name, but can you give an example just so people know what you're talking about?
Sure. So I don't know what your specific feelings are on, say, BCAA supplements.
Right. They don't work according to
Do you have any strong feelings on them?
It's better to have protein or essential amino acids based on the best research, but they just don't work unless you're not getting enough protein. But it's not an emotional sort of thing. I just looked at the data.
So I don't want to step on toes in a lot of these situations, but this is a good example. So BCAAs, it's funny because logically you would think, okay, well, these have to be just beneficial because protein's made of amino acids, and this is a great thing. And we can point to a lot of benefits of these because when they're contained in whole proteins, they're very beneficial in the complement of all the other amino acids and everything like that. Now, this hit the scene really hardcore in the early 2000s. And, the data that we had at the time didn't really give us any insight into, okay, well, when and how could these work? And are there any negatives? We just had some very minimal data on, there were two kind of seminal studies. And there was one where it was working with wrestlers who were completely starving themselves to make weight, and they gave themselves some BCAAs and it seemed to increase recovery. And then there was another where they put mice in a pool. They starved these mice, they put them in a pool, and the ones that were given BCAAs were able to tread water longer. And so this kind of blew up BCAAs. And then there were a bunch of researchers that started to go into this, and they're like, oh my God, let's do this. Let's sell these supplements. It's amazing. And then 5-10 years into the whole BCAA, let's call it a panic, we started getting research back that showed that even with minimal amounts of daily protein, not even the optimal amounts for increasing performance or physique, there's a study where they did 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight in the elderly who have impaired protein absorption anyways. And it was still negating all of the benefits of BCAAs. And this was 2008, maybe. And so we're more than 10 years outside of this. There are researchers that I know are a lot smarter than what they were giving themselves credit for, but they were working for supplement companies. And they were still pushing this despite the fact that we started to get mountains and mountains of research that showed that these don't really do anything. And then in the middle of the 2010s, we started getting more research that, okay, maybe they provide competitive absorption problems, because if you're only taking in 3 different aminos, you only have so many transporters to be able to absorb aminos. Maybe it's blocking the absorption of some of the other ones that you need the full complement to repair muscles. You need the full complement to, build hormone signalers. You need the full complement to help the immune system. And so now we're absorbing a flood of just these 3, and we're missing out on the others. And so our body's not working as efficiently. Then in 2017, Wolf came out with a study. And what Wolf 2017 found was the one time that most people were saying you should be taking BCAAs when you're fasted may actually cause problems. They showed that there might be a little bit of an uptick in the muscle protein synthesis, which is what people were going for, but it also seemed to cause an even bigger uptick in muscle protein breakdown. So when you're fasted, there's the potential that having BCAAs may actually cause more muscle protein breakdown and actually cause you to lose more muscle. And so we started to get all of this information. And yet we're seeing these guys who are still today considered some of the most reliable guys on the internet. And they were telling everybody, no, keep buying these products. They're great. Look at these studies. And they would point back to the ones where, they were either starving and then this made them increase performance, because why wouldn't it? It has calories. They don't have to list calories on a BCAA supplement, because when free-form aminos are out there legally, according to the FDA, you don't have to list calories, but they all contain calories. They contain 4.65 calories per gram. And what helps you perform, exercise? Having calories. It's energy. And so people kept making these excuses to continue taking it. But you're like, well, if you're looking for an energy source, then carbs are more readily utilized. So why not just have a Gatorade? No, buy our BCAAs because, and so the problem was this research kept picking up more and more and more, showing that this is a problematic thing potentially with no real benefits. And in fact, in the situations where it would help, probably better to just take carbs. But when money's in play, and this can be for anything in fitness and health, you have to be a little bit critical of the information that's out there and say, okay, well, I see that this study that's being presented, but what is the rest of the breadth of evidence? And what is that saying? And social media is a crazy thing because, getting that like count, getting that share count, getting those hits that essentially translate into income seems to be the driving force in a lot of this. It's scary to see this stuff done because for the listeners, as a person that's listening to this type of thing, and your life does not revolve around reading fitness and health research, because why would it? How are you supposed to understand who's reliable? And it's a very challenging thing with social media.
Well, and there is no way really, because even if someone has an MD after their name or PhD after their name, there's a lot of people, the carnivore doctor.
The guys that I'm thinking of have PhD after their name, and they were the ones that were still pushing it, despite the fact that I guarantee you they knew better.
Yeah. And you're bringing up so mmany great points here. And I forget who made it, but it's like, we're no longer in the information age. The information just keeps going out, but it's no longer that useful. It's like we're in the reputation age. It's like, we need the perspective. You need to find the people who you trust and listen to and just ignore everyone else, or at least, keep them on the periphery, because you can go down some very deep rabbit holes that don't lead to any meaningful positive change in your life. Or another thing that came up for me is I was actually looking into supplements and having a supplement, and I contacted a manufacturer, and he was trying to sell me on the idea CLA supplement, because I was, I'm all about, like, let's put something together with protein and creatine, and but he was all about the CLA, and it's just because it sells. BCAAs, they sell, and until the market changes,
fat burners, they sell.
Exactly, fat burners, they sell. Who are they selling to? The type of people. Hopefully, they're not listening to this show, but because they should know better. If you've listened to a few episodes of this, one more thing I want to point out, Alan. I want to point out that you even felt the need to ask me about my personal stance on BCAAs, just to make sure that, because we don't know each other, this is the first time we're talking, just to make sure this whole podcast didn't turn into didn't
derail.
Exactly. That's the state of the industry that we're in, between people who are actually in the industry. I could only imagine what it's like being on the outside, just like, hey, I want to lose some weight, man. Just trying to get a little healthier. And you guys are trying to kill each other over, does cholesterol.
Something that doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. So many things.
It's difficult because, like we said, how do you identify who you're listening to is the right person to listen to? And certainly having things like PhD after your name can be a good thing. Is it necessarily a good thing? No, unfortunately, the letters don't really tell you a whole lot. I mean, even registered dietitians can be problematic when talking with them about. And this isn't a slight against registered dietitians. This is a slight against the fact that we can't rely on those acronyms after a name as a sign of credibility. It's just the reality.
Not by itself, right?
No, not by itself. Now it can be a good first, okay, is this something that I should look into? And it can be that, because at least if somebody has a PhD, an MD, something like that, they've probably had some formal training on being able to understand the body or read research. And that's a good starting point. But then it's, okay, well, where are they going with that?
Buy my BCAA supplement.
Buy my BCAAs. Yeah.
Well, I think we're off to a good start. So let's dial in then, before we get to the plateaus. Let's dial in, why do you think it is so, besides what we talked about, the misinformation, the infobesity, as some people call it. Why are people, when they know what to do, some of the examples you gave earlier, in your experience as a coach, why are they having so many challenges implementing it in your experience with your clients?
I think that they know the broad strokes. I think that the problem comes in some of the nuance and some of the application of those broad strokes. And I think that there's parts of it where it's a situation where people don't know what they don't know. And so they know in a lot of instances, okay, the basis for weight change is energy balance, right? If you're taking in less calories than you're putting out, if you're taking in more calories than you're putting out, you're going to gain weight. And in the opposite, you're going to lose weight, right? So it all comes down to energy balance. But I think that people can lose the forest for the trees trying to figure out how to do that, how to track whether they're doing that correctly, understanding how to really put that into place. So they know that they need to eat better. And you've probably heard this with your clients before too. I eat clean, but I can't lose weight. Well, what does eating clean mean? And I think that some of these little nuances to amounts and different types of food and actually pushing fiber and the macros aren't the only thing that necessarily matter in a fitness journey. Now, not necessarily from a weight loss change, but from overall health, satiety, all these different things add in. And I think that the broad strokes are pretty well understood for most people. But I think that actually putting that into play and then understanding what pitfalls they may run into may not be. And that's what I want to touch on today, actually illuminating some of these pitfalls that you can run into, being able to identify where you're running into problems, being able to identify how to address those problems, and then actually finally moving forward.
So let's get into it. What do we need to know about the plateaus, the obstacles?
So plateaus will come in two forms. It'll be either a nutrition or fitness plateau, and both are important. So let's cover nutrition first, and then we'll transition into fitness. As I mentioned, the biggest thing for diets working, whether they work or not for weight loss or weight gain, is going to be it's going to come down to energy balance. And as long as protein and calories are equated between diets, you're going to see roughly the same results. Now, protein is important because if you don't equate protein between diets, you're going to have differences in lean muscle loss. If you're losing weight, you're going to have differences in lean muscle gain when you're gaining weight. But I point this out to show that for the most part, fats and carbs are relatively interchangeable for weight loss and weight gain. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to have the exact same performance depending on what you're doing as exercise, but weight loss and weight gain tends to be the same. Now, I think the one thing that's extremely important to address is that average resting metabolic rates are probably lower than what people think. For men, it's only about 1,700 calories per day. For women, it's 1,400. Now, that's resting metabolic rates. Our total calorie burn is going to be higher because of the movement that we have throughout the day, through exercise, all that kind of stuff. But, when certain women, especially sedentary women, start working with me and they're like, I've been told that if I eat 1,200 calories or less, then, there's something wrong with my diet, or I'm going to enter.
It's unhealthy.
It's unhealthy. But how big are you? I've worked with 4'10" females. And if an average female's resting metabolic rate is 1,400, theirs is probably around 1,200 or so. And so if they're not moving a whole lot, maybe their daily energy output is 1,500 calories, which means if they need to go into a calorie deficit, they're actually down at 1,100. So I want to point that out because I think that a lot of people, particularly smaller women, can get frustrated because they'll hear that comment, oh, if you're at 1,200, and I don't know why it's always 1,200. But it does appear to always be 1,200.
It's just on the internet, It's like 1,800 for men, or what is it? 2,000 something for men, but it's 1,200 for women. Like, we all just know that.
Yeah. And nobody knows why they know that. And so that's why I wanted to point out, just because you're at 1,200, it could be wrong. And maybe it is for particularly larger people or active people. But it may not be wrong for you. But I want to point this out because this is a good idea to point out the fact that starvation mode, the idea that you can eat so few calories that you stop losing fat, it doesn't exist. And we have a lot of low-calorie diet research that debunks this. But what does happen is is something called metabolic adaptation. And that's important to understand, because if you can understand this can get you past a lot of those plateaus before they even begin, because you understand what's happening with your body. Now, when you start to lose weight, your body's going to require less calories. The idea behind starvation mode is that somehow that resting metabolic rate that was 1700 for men, 1400 for women drops precipitously beyond what it should be. Just doesn't seem to happen. And we have a lot of research looking at that. In the average RMR drop, it does drop a little bit beyond what it should. So if you go from 180 pounds to 160, if you compare yourself to another person that's been 160 pounds their whole life, your RMR is going to be slightly different, probably a little depressed. But that,
or it can be, right? It can be all the time. It can be.
But the average for 20 to 30 pounds of weight loss is between 5 and 25 calories per day. So let's put that in perspective. Is a quarter of a fun-sized Snickers bar the thing that's keeping you from losing weight in a day? Probably not. And so that's why I want to bring up that there is an RMR drop, but it's so low to be inconsequential. And I mean, even in the Minnesota starvation experiments, you remember those from the 50s? I mean, this is the best evidence that we have on massive weight loss. They lost 25% of their entire body weight. And the metabolic drop that they had was between 75 and 100 calories per day. Once you adjust for the differences in body size, because obviously if you start at 300 pounds and you go down to 180 pounds, the 180 pound person is going to require less. So cut off all of the difference in change from a change in body weight, and then look at that compared to another person that's been 180 pounds their entire life. You have a drop of maybe 75 to 100 calories per day, but that's in people that have lost a massive amount of weight, which is not the majority of people. But even then, that's a single fun-sized Snickers bar a day. So is this the issue that we're having with nutrition? No, it's probably not. So with metabolic adaptation, what really ends up happening that can stall us a bit is NEAT drops, which is the fancy acronym for the movement that we experience throughout the day, our twitching, our walking, the energy that we put out at work. That tends to drop. And then our hunger drive goes up. So what tends to happen to these people is they become subconsciously more sedentary and they start snacking more. And so these are the really big things that you have to look out for.
And it's unconscious, right? So people think there's no change, but people
don't notice it.
Snacking more, right? They don't notice it. This is really hard to communicate sometimes to someone who's experiencing that.
It is. And I mean, the only thing that you can really do to help counterbalance this is to start monitoring things. And so, people have an understanding of monitoring food, keeping a food diary, maybe tracking macros or whatever method that you choose to track. But I think a lot of people have issues with figuring out ways to track NEAT because it's difficult. I mean, how do you track twitching or everything that you do? And you've probably...
Or your posture, right?
Yeah. As I'm slouching right now. But, the best thing that I've found and what I work with my clients is that I have them wear a pedometer anytime they're not working out, not actively working out. And that gives us a proxy for what NEAT might be, because if they're sitting on the couch versus if they're walking around, we can get a good idea. And the idea here isn't necessarily to say, okay, well, we need to see an exact number of steps. It's to say, okay, well, when you started out, we started monitoring this. When you were 190 pound female, we started monitoring this and you were getting 7,000 steps a day. Now you're 145 pounds. You're only getting 3,500 steps a day. Did you realize this? And so all of a sudden they're like, well, I'm eating slightly less, but now I'm stalling in weight or I'm going up in weight. Well, we have an idea now to be able to look at, okay, well, this might be why, because you've cut your steps in half. You're burning a lot less from your daily activity movements. And I think that people underestimate.
Can you talk a little bit more about this, Alan? Because I think also one thing a mistake I made and a mistake I see people making is they think the massive amount of calories I'm burning in my exercise, that's what really matters versus, getting a few thousand steps in per day. Can you talk a little bit more about that? This
is a beautiful comment. It's a beautiful question. And it's beautiful because, and I know that you know where I'm going with this, but it's very, very good to clarify. And a workout that's pretty intensive from a weights perspective, like a weight training workout, you're not going to burn that many calories. Maybe 250, maybe 300 in an hour. And that's with an intense workout. And with step count, with NEAT, they've seen upwards of 2,000 extra calories per day in agricultural jobs. And so calorie burn seems to be less about intensity. Yes, intensity does increase calorie burn, but there's diminishing returns on what intensity does. Now, fatigue and perceived fatigue continues to go up. So you think, oh, I'm working a lot harder. I must be burning a lot more calories. it doesn't necessarily work that way I'm trying to change my energy balance equation to lose body fat. It's more about volume than anything else. Now, why is that? Because movement tends to burn more calories. The more intense movements, and particularly movements with weight training, which is anaerobic, tends to burn less calories. And the more intense that you are, the less volume that you can put in. I mean, if you're going to be doing wind sprints, you're going to be going for maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes, whereas you can walk for 45 minutes to 60 minutes straight. And that just steady burn tends to burn a lot more calories. And what's really confusing about this, and this is one of the things that I was going to get into a little bit later, but fits in nicely here. A lot of people are overestimating their energy output because they'll wear something like one of those watches that estimates calorie burn. And the problem with that is they have been shown in studies, and I can get anybody this research if you want to ask Ted or I at the end. These watches have overestimated calorie burn by up to 93%. And
93.
Up to 93. Yeah.
Wow.
And so, or it's 92. Please don't be mad if it's between those two, but I can prove above 90. But the fact that they can be off by this much, it tells me exactly why. I get into arguments online, and these days I've done it so long that I just sit back and I'm like, okay, well, where are you getting these numbers? Because someone will tell me, oh, I did an hour workout yesterday and I burned 800 calories. And I was like, did you just finish a full marathon? In that time period, did you break world records on marathons? And they're like, no, I did a weight training workout. You didn't burn 800 calories. There's no possible way that you did. And a lot of the reason is people are convinced that these trackers work when in reality, they don't at all. And they're a guesstimate of a guesstimate, because what they do is they use either heart rate itself or heart rate variability. And neither of these things actually measure calorie burn. What you have to do is something called indirect calorimetry, which means if you don't have a mask attached to your face that's measuring the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, nobody can tell you how many calories that you've burned. But people believe that because, Apple sells a product that does it, that it somehow has to be real.
It tells me how many calories. They're not just making the numbers up, are they? Well, yeah.
The problem is they are just making the numbers up. And I don't think that people realize that, like, there's no government agency that's saying this is really messed up. It doesn't work, so you can't do this. Like, nobody's policing this. And they know that these devices sell. I mean, people love these things. People love, Fitbits for this type of information. They love these things that are sleep trackers for this type of information. And none of these things work because, unfortunately, they're following heart rate and heart rate variability, and those aren't direct measures. With sleep trackers, they have real issues following certain stages of sleep, like REM sleep can't be picked up by sleep trackers. So they try to guess. And again, the only way that you can figure that out is to put electrodes on your body, to actually monitor electrical signals. And so, there's a reason that these things are never used in research, because they just don't really work, and I like that people are taking an active stance in their health because they want to be able to figure out what's going on here. But it's good to know these pitfalls. And this is the type of thing that we were talking about in the beginning. People know the broad strokes. I need to lose calories. But then they're assuming that they're losing 800 calories in their workout when they're probably losing 300. And now all of their planning is thrown off because they are now taking in 500 more calories than they think per day. And that's actually the average for people. If you look at the research, the average error in tracking calories is 500 calories per day for non-registered dietitians who tend to be better. They tend to be at about 200. But if somebody whose entire job is doing this and they're off by 200 calories per day, the average person, the average for them is 500. And typically in the obese, and this is potentially one of the reasons why there may be some obesity in play, because the ability to understand how much you're eating may be a little bit off. Hunger cues may be a little bit off. There's a lot of this stuff that comes into play that gives some extra challenges to the obese. They've been shown to be off by 1,100 calories per day. So you're eating, half of the amount of an entire other human per day that you don't realize that you're eating. No wonder people are struggling to do this type of thing. So there's 4 main things to look into before you assume that you're actually stalled with nutrition. And that's, you may have an inaccurate calorie intake. And when you eat out at restaurants, it's good to know that on average, a restaurant's off by about 20% in their calories. If you go to McDonald's and on their menu, it says, this burger is 500 calories, add 20% to that, and if you're not preparing the food yourself, you're probably going to have some inaccuracy in these things. But even those can be incredibly surprising to people because there's been research that's looked at full meals at restaurants. And when you have a full meal and you have a side, sometimes they're off by 245%. And I think that it blows people's minds to realize how much these can be off. So another thing that you looked into, overestimating your activity, like we talked about, you might be confusing weight loss for fat loss. When you start out, you lose a ton of weight from, say, you're cutting carbs, you lose the muscle glycogen in the water from that. And then all of a sudden it starts to slow down and you're like, oh, I'm plateaued. But in reality, you're just now seeing what the actual rate of fat loss is because you flushed out that water and muscle glycogen. And only after checking out those things, the accuracy of your tracking, making sure you're not overestimating calorie burn, making sure you're not being confused with weight loss and fat loss. Only then should you start to look at things like, okay, well, is a medication that I'm taking like an antidepressant or corticosteroid causing problems? Do I have diabetes medication that might be causing issues? Anxiolytics. There's a ton of meds that could be adding in, but it's not the first thing that I would jump to.
Talk about that a little bit. When you say a medication can be affecting weight loss, what do you mean specifically about that? Just so someone doesn't come away with, oh, calories matter, but not if you're taking these medications.
So they still matter, but what it ends up doing is it shifts that energy balance. And so you are a normal person without taking the medication. And obviously this doesn't affect everybody the same way. And it doesn't necessarily affect everybody if they're taking this medication. One person taking antipsychotics might not see this. Another person taking antipsychotics might. If you are not taking the antipsychotics, there is a feasible situation in which case you might require 2,000 calories to maintain weight. Let's just throw out a random number. You might require 2,000 calories to maintain weight. You start taking this medication. It might cause some issues with the way that you absorb food, with the way that your thyroid functions, with the way that some of these other biological systems function. And now instead of needing 2,000 calories to maintain weight, you now only need 1,700. So you start to gain body fat.
And what changes specifically there to lower?
There could be a variety of reasons. There could be insulin resistance coming into play. There could be impacts on on thyroid function. T4, T3 might be affected.
And this is specifically for the antipsychotics or for all the medications that you talked about?
All the medications that I've talked about. There's a variety of medications that can cause this. And even with things like corticosteroids, that could cause issues with hormones in general. I mean, it can cause issues with testosterone and estrogen. It might cause issues with holding water. I mean, you've probably heard of people who have been on corticosteroids for long periods of time getting really bloated. And then all of a sudden the scale starts to rise, and it may not really have anything to do specifically with your calorie intakes, but it may be affected by the fact that you're now bloating and holding water because of a medication that is, either interacting with your system a little bit poorly, or maybe you're taking too high of a dose for too long.
Yeah. Let's talk about this a little bit more, Alan, because I feel like this is one of the situations where we actually had a client who was on an SSRI, if I remember correctly, and she was struggling with losing weight, and we didn't have the medication conversation. We didn't get into it. She was part of my group, not a one-on-one client. And she was trying so hard to lose weight. And we just kept, hey, listen, she was going off and going out to eat a lot and taking vacations and not tracking over the weekend sometimes.
And that's why I touched on that. That's probably the more likely issue. Now, that doesn't mean that medications can't cause some challenges there, because another issue that you might have with certain medications is there might be an increase in hunger drive. And so remember when we were talking about maybe you're inaccurately tracking, then there's more of an issue with people snacking more without realizing, I'm just going to have a handful of trail mix, and then not even realizing that they're doing that. And so are medications the main reason that people are stalling? No, probably not. If you do think that it's a medication that might be causing a problem, I would bring that up to, your healthcare practitioner that's bringing this up. the appropriate way to look at this is to talk to them, potentially run some bloods, see if your A1C is being affected, see if thyroid values are being, a metabolic panel would be very helpful here. And this is one of those things when medication is involved, this is something that you can't self-diagnose. But what I want to do is I want to point out those first three things of inaccurate calorie tracking, overestimating your activity, and then confusing weight loss and fat loss should be investigated first. And then once you've investigated all those things and you're like, I'm tracking 100%, and it can help with a coach because they can take a look at what you're tracking. Because a lot of times I've seen this where a person is tracking peanut butter, but their peanut butter, the thing that they're plugging in to say MyFitnessPal or something like that is completely wrong. The values that they have is completely wrong. And so that could be an issue. Maybe a lot of people don't realize this. Maybe you are using an uncooked measurement, but you're weighing cooked, which can throw things off a lot. Maybe you are using 93% ground beef when your plan or your coach has said, hey, maybe you should be using 96% based on, your body weight and the fact that I want you to have a little bit more food. And you think it's just 3%. It's not that big a deal. It's a massive difference in calories. And, for the same amount of like gram weight of food, and so address these things first. And then if you're still having these issues, talk to your doctor and say, hey, could we run a metabolic panel? Can we run a thyroid panel? And see if this medication that I'm taking may be causing some issues, because that could very well be in play. And it's not that it can stop you completely. It's that it can throw a wrench into the system to where, things are a lot harder for you in, losing weight or whatever it is than it used to be. And maybe this is a reason. But again, we've got the other things that we need to track too. Did your step count drop? Because before you never knew that you needed to watch step count, and what is all playing in here? These stalls are difficult for people to address without, learning these practical ways of, okay, well, what do I need to look at? And in what stages should I start to, investigate where the problem would be? And the first thing is, are you overestimating your intake? The second thing is, well, what's going on with your energy expenditure? Are your step counts dropping? And so you systematically start to chip away at, okay, well, what's the most likely cause of me experiencing this issue? And then knock those out. And once you've knocked those out, then you move down the list and you finally get to medication.
Yeah, Alan, that was great. And I just want to follow up with two things. I wanted to also say that client, she didn't have great results in the program because of she lost weight when she first joined. And then I don't remember how much, it was maybe 10 or 15 pounds. And it was a slow creep up back to her original weight. And then when she left the program, she ended up coming off that medication. She was taking it for migraines. And so she switched medication. She was able to drop weight very fast. And it's just something someone should be aware of. If you're feeling like you're really struggling looking into the medication after doing all the things that you said, but even so, Alan, I feel like sometimes people just, for whatever reason, it's so hard to put your mental energy on, okay, am I doing everything right? Am I tracking everything? I've got kids. Oh, wait a minute, work. And it's just so easy to get lost. And right after she left and dropped or stopped taking the medication, she dropped weight. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, did you have a follow-up there? You want to say something?
Well, so there is a method that I use in last-ditch scenarios to try to identify whether or not it's a nutritional issue. And I bring this up because it works extremely well if you can get a person to do it. And that's the hitch here. Because what do you do as a coach who's working remotely, right? You're not sitting in the room with them. You're not seeing them cook. You're not, and so you have only so much control over somebody, and you're trusting that they're giving you the right information. And in a lot of instances, they're not. And this isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily that they're lying to you. It's that they don't realize what they're doing. And so they may be adding a lot more calories into whatever they're doing without realizing what they're doing. And so if you've gone through, a series of questions, I actually have a series of questions that I ask them, where we talk about, okay, well, are we getting any extra liquid calories? What are we doing for condiments? What are we cooking things in? Are we using 90%, 93% ground beef? Whatever we've talked about, are we using these things? And a lot of times they'll be like, yeah, I'm doing all this. And so the last thing that I would recommend doing, and this is good for people to be able to check this on their own at home, go to the store and say that you've calculated what you think that you roughly need for calories. It doesn't matter what it is. Go to the store, get lean cuisines to meet that calorie requirement, and then eat them and only them for 2 weeks and see what happens. Because that can help remove any of those errors in cooking that a person might be making. And if all of a sudden, you were eating 1,500 calories and you were cooking and you weren't losing weight, and then you eat 1,500 calories of lean cuisines for 2 straight weeks and you lose 2 pounds, it's like, oh shit, what's going on here? Is that an easy answer? No. Do we have a small amount of tools to be able to use from a remote situation when we've gone through all the rest of these things? Yeah, we do. And this is a good way to at least have some control in what we're eating. Now, should you add 20% to those calories? I probably wouldn't. Like I would recommend if you were eating out at a restaurant or McDonald's, because somebody else is preparing that food at McDonald's or a restaurant. Typically with prepackaged foods, they already have that 20% error taken into account. And they're supposed to have things rather, equal across things. Now, a food delivery service like Trifecta or something like that, they don't have quite the same standards, even though it looks like it's prepackaged. So I would, if I was doing that, add 20% to those. So this is that nuance that's really annoying to talk about that can be life-changing for these people, if you start to put these into play. But is it a perfect answer or a perfect protocol to use? No. Is it a good one to at least try? And if you can force yourself to do something like that for 2 weeks, it might give you some information that, okay, well, I really do need to kind of evaluate what I'm doing here as far as, the way that I prepare food, because something's off here.
Yeah, powerfully stated, Alan. And it is annoying to talk about, and it certainly it's nowhere near as entertaining as a 1 day of carnivore diet video with testicle popsicles.
Yeah, or completely changing up your routines every 5 seconds to shock your body into change. That's what I was saying. The real answers to these things are far more boring, but they're far more helpful.
It's boring to address, or maybe boring but tedious is the word that kind of comes up. But the results are sexy. I got to say that they're worth it.
Yeah, they are. No, I can say this. No one has ever regretted looking into this stuff and then streamlining their process when they get the results that they were struggling to get. No one has ever regrets this. And this is the type of information that can really make that happen.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And it's really tough to do this on your own, I think. Even me, I hired a coach in 2019, Eric, who was just on the show recently. Actually, for the first time, Eric Williamson from Unlocked Fitness and Nutrition. And man, it was a game changer for me. So one thing I wanted to ask you about is you mentioned earlier about the insulin resistance being a potential issue with weight loss. Can you talk more about what you mean by that?
So this is something that when it starts, I'm not a big person that really pushes insulin as something that's going to massively change weight loss or weight gain, because even with things like semaglutide, which is a GLP-1 mimetic, it raises insulin and people still lose weight. The issue comes into play when your system gets completely thrown out of balance, and then you start to have metabolic pathology. And this is the same type of thing that you're going to start dipping into diabetes. And do diabetics have issues losing weight at lower calories? Yeah, they have a tendency to. And part of this is because of these changes that happen with the body. So is this something that's relevant to people that are otherwise healthy? No. Energy balance is going to trump this. A negative energy balance is going to lead to weight loss no matter what insulin is doing. And semaglutide and those other, insulin mimetic or GLP-1 mimetic drugs show this. Does this have a tendency to change when you have pathology in play? Yeah, this can throw a wrench into things, but this is where it can get really...
How does it change, though? What is the mechanism there?
The mechanism is, it's an issue with actually absorbing and utilizing carbohydrates correctly. There becomes more of a storage issue rather than being used for, muscle glycogen synthesis and some of these other things. It's essentially a retardation of what the pathway should actually be. And people I don't know if you're familiar with Fung and his research, the obesity code guy.
Yeah, I know about Jason. I have not read his book and not a fan. in general, but
no, and I'm not either. And so this is where I kind of want to show the distinction here. Remember, we're going to get into the thing where we're going to start fighting at some point. We're dodging that. we're dodging that. So
BCAAs, bro.
Yes. The issue with Fung's research is he'll point out research that's in diabetics, and he'll say this is why you can't eat carbs because insulin's problematic. But what is disingenuous about this take is that's not how it works in somebody that has actual glucose control. And so this is where he actually presents research, and people say, oh, well, maybe I should trust him because he's showing me this research that shows that this impaired glucose response is causing things like weight gain, metabolic syndrome, and some of these other problems, which causes a breakdown of a lot of the systems. Maybe that's something that I really need to pay attention to, and maybe I can't eat white rice. Maybe I have to eat all vegetables, or maybe I have to eat just brown rice or something else. But it doesn't work that way in an otherwise healthy person because we do have proper glucose handling abilities and our body takes care of it. With respect to how medications can affect body fat gain, this typically has a combination of factors in play. If you are in a calorie deficit, the calorie deficit is going to trump the action of insulin. However, if medications are causing some insulin resistance, are causing some type of metabolic shift or metabolic syndrome, moving you into a sort of pathology, the issue comes into play when that compounds with things like, errors in tracking, errors in, how much you're taking in, errors in how much you think that you're expending. And when you start to go above maintenance calories, even when you're not realizing it, having some of these issues with some of this metabolic disturbance can cause insulin to cause more shuttling of extra calories into body fat rather than into being used for, repairing lean muscle, building lean muscle, or just being absorbed and utilized as energy. And so these actions of the hypothyroid or medications that cause hypothyroid issues can directly affect the energy balance equation. The issues with medications that affect insulin handling and glucose handling tend to affect partitioning, which becomes really apparent when you are above maintenance calories, whether you're doing it intentionally or unintentionally.
No, thanks for clearing that up, Alan. And now let's get into the topic of weight loss medications. What are your thoughts on those? I mean, we're both coaches. Some people who are in the business of weight loss or fat loss coaching or programs, cohorts, whatever, have really disliked them. I've had a couple clients who I've told, hey, listen, we've tried everything. Your lifestyle, for whatever reason, you're not able to consistently get into a calorie deficit and maintain it. You keep going down, coming back up, and you're 60 years old. Go talk to a bariatric doctor, get on this medication, and maybe we can deal with the lifestyle stuff later. Most people, should not even be worried about it. They're not hitting that 30 BMI standard, right? You can't even get it prescribed to you, even though, by the way, it's hard to find here. I'm in Brazil right now. People are like getting doctors to prescribe it. And so if you're a diabetic and you are 30 BMI or, whatever the situation is, it's hard to even get the medication. You have to wait for it. But what are your just thoughts about it overall?
So based on the information that's out there so far, I'm a fan of it if used as an adjunct to proper nutrition and exercise. And I've seen, really good data on it so far. I know that some people are really afraid of lean muscle loss and stuff like that. And I'm not really seeing that in people that are actually exercising or in general. I don't think that's a major issue. Now, can you have lean muscle loss from losing body weight really quickly? Yeah, you can. So what do? I mean, then you do the same things that we would be recommending as coaches anyways. You keep your protein higher, you do some weight training if possible. And I think that you counterbalance any of those negatives. But I like these medications because I think that there are a lot of people that fight these discordant hunger cues. And so for them, they're really experiencing a lot more hunger than another person. And this can be one of those ways to really help get that under control. So then the fitness and lifestyle adjustments that you're making can finally make some sense. They're able to be more consistent with it.
Yeah. Nir Ayal, who's not in the weight loss industry at all, he's like a consultant for social media companies and wrote some books on productivity and how to make technology more addictive. But one of the things he said, because he's had his own weight loss journey, he's actually been on the show as well. He said that pills don't teach skills. And I really like that a lot.
That's true. And I think that looking at this as this is my answer to losing weight is probably missing the point. But I like it as an adjunct to the right mindset and the right practices. And I think that it's funny because you see people on both sides of this. And I think that a lot of people get really negative about it, maybe when they shouldn't be overly negative about it. But I see also other people trying to get these, like you said, when they're not necessarily indicated for this type of medication. And they're just trying to force it because maybe they think that it's a way around doing the right thing. But, no matter what, if you really want to have optimal health, performance, and quality of life, you're going to have to change the way that you eat, most likely if you think that you're qualified for this medication. So overall, I'm a fan when it's used right.
Yeah, me too. Some people are like, "Oh, you're going to be out of a job." I'm like, most of the clients that I work with aren't 30 BMI. I'm hesitant to work with clients who have so much weight to lose. It's a longer journey. I don't want to get into my thoughts about it, but I think there's more emotional challenges, specifically stress challenges involved in the situation. And someone would really have to be like, "Hey, listen, I'm in it for a year. Let's do this. I'm ready to go." But one thing I wanted to say, I know you have a follow up there, but I wanted to say this about your point on about always the right mindset and strategies. I've got a friend of mine in Sao Paulo, beautiful guy. She's an OB/GYN doctor. I was trying to. She's very fit, but she just couldn't get rid of the last bit of fat on her. She had a little bit of, she didn't have abs, right? But she wanted abs. And so she ended up getting liposuction from one of the best doctors in Sao Paulo, and Brazil has excellent doctors. She ended up getting not an infection, but the tissue started to turn necrotic or almost necrotic. That's outside of my wheelhouse. I know you were trained as a dental surgeon, so I'm sure you understand this a bit better. But she had to go to the hyperbaric chamber, and it was just changed her life, this whole experience. It was life-changing. She felt like she might even die because of it. And she still has some discoloration where the tissue changed colors when it was, I guess, hypoxic or whatever turning necrotic. And I was like, if you just would have listened to me, if we just would have changed your workout, would have tracked your calories, you could have avoided this whole thing. And my point in saying that is there is no shortcut. Everything has a cost or a risk associated to it. Just I wanted to make sure people got that message.
Well, you also miss out on a lot of the beneficial changes if you're doing it in that manner. For instance, you're not going to get the same type of cardiovascular benefits. You're not going to get the same type of metabolic health benefits that you would if you built some lean muscle. And having more lean muscle makes you metabolically thrifty. You can weather change a little bit better. You can you're more resistant to disease, and there's better quality of life overall. And I think that people that I don't necessarily think that having surgery is inherently wrong. I think that there are risks, and like you said, you could have some issues with an iatrogenic problem, which is what that was. You had cell death, and I think that also people don't realize that when you have a surgery like that, there is the potential for fat to become redistributed, and so you can remove fat from, say.
What do you mean by that?
Well, this is not my area of expertise, but it's something that has been
totally get it.
This is something that has been shown as a potential side effect to liposuction type procedures, is that fat cells are removed from, say, the stomach area, and that there becomes a preponderance of buildup of fat storage somewhere else. So if you don't necessarily change your habits and routines to prevent fat regain, if you're continuing to eat at that calorie surplus that you were at that got you to have that stomach fat in the first place, Well, now you no longer have those fat cells in your stomach area. So those extra calories are going to be stored somewhere else. And so then all of a sudden these people start to have like back fat that they had never had before, or like fat on their arms that they had never had before, to a much greater extent, because those extra calories need to go somewhere. And, you've lost those fat cells that were in your stomach. And the reality of fat loss is you don't actually remove the fat cells. Fat cell death is a very rare thing. You deplete them. And so it looks like the fat's gone, but those fat cells essentially stay even when you're lean. And that's what refills back up as you go back into a calorie surplus. But when you have the liposuction, you actually remove them. And so when you start to regain fat, where does it go? Well, it's got to go somewhere. And so what some people have seen is some very, very strange fat redistribution patterns, because you can't control where it goes back. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Yeah. Why I asked you about it was because I know you're in Maui. I was based in Miami Beach for many years. I've seen so many people get lipo, and they look strange when it inevitably comes back, because it's just like giving someone, if I could snap my fingers and give you someone who's obese abs, they would lose it really quick, because it's about the habits, the knowledge, the skills, and if you don't have that, you can't keep it. Kind of like people who win the lottery and end up even more having more problems. Not exactly the same there, but the point is you got to have the habits and skills and knowledge. So it's fascinating. That is also scary a little bit, because I wasn't seeing them in their bathing suits. They were in their workout clothes. So
it's such a risk. And like we said in the very beginning, when you move into this health and fitness lifestyle, people know for the most part where they should be at least going. And these shortcuts, although viable for treatments, they don't replace what we should be doing anyways. And I think that's where that kind of gets lost in translation.
Yeah, well said, Alan. It's been a pleasure, man. I really appreciate your content on Instagram. It was even more fun sitting down and talking to you. I feel like we just scratched the surface here. So yeah, we will have to do a part 2 sometime soon. And if you're listening today and you enjoyed Alan's information, the way he talks about things, and if you're on Instagram, you've got to give him a follow at Dr. Alan Bacon. That's DrAllanBacon on Instagram, or go to his website, MauiAthletics.com. But again, I can't emphasize enough, if you're on Instagram, he's one of the people that you need to follow. Please stop following Jason Fung and the other people who we talked, and anyone who's showing you a day of eating of their carnivore or whatever diet they're doing, and like it's supposed to be anything other than just something to get clicks and likes and shares. So thanks so much, Alan. Really enjoyed today's conversation with you.
Thank you, Ted. It's been a pleasure.
That wraps up today's episode. And I want to ask you, what are you going to do different as a result of having listened to this conversation with Dr. Alan Bacon? What is one thing that you can apply into your life, either that you heard on today's show, or maybe that today's show inspired you to think about? What is something that you can take action on? Remember, knowledge, it's not power. That's a lie. But what is power is when you take knowledge and apply it into your life. And I would even argue that's truly what knowledge is to begin with. So what can you take action on? Now, until Friday, we're going to meet again, and we're going to be talking about the secret to superhuman performance no one tells you. Now, we all want to be successful. We all want to perform our best, not only at work, but in our relationships, in life in general. But the question is, how do we tap into that level of performance? What can we do to put ourselves in the zone more consistently and reliably? That's the question I'm going to answer. Tune in on Friday to find out the secret. Have an amazing week, and I'll speak to you then. If you want to get leaner, stronger, and upgrade your health this year, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my Unstoppable After 40 newsletter. Every Friday, I send out my newsletter to help you transform your body and reclaim your health in record time. It's weekly wisdom you can read in just under 5 minutes. So go to legendarylifepodcast.com/newsletter and subscribe now. And if you're already a subscriber, I want you to pay attention for emails that are coming. We've totally revamped the newsletter, and I know you're going to love it. That's all I've got. Again, go to legendarylifepodcast.com/newsletter and subscribe now.